First, for nearly 25 years, Jean Becker was the chief of staff for former President George H.W. Bush. She was with him in Kennebunkport in Texas, in his office, his kitchen, his speedboat, just about everywhere and with everyone, from heads of state to shoppers at Sam's Club. She has written a memoir about her quarter century with George Bush called The Man I Knew. We talked with her by Zoom when the book was first published. Now it's out in paperback, and Jean Becker was recently in Maine. So we sat down again because she has so many stories we didn't get to the first time, many of them very funny, about life up close with the Bushes. One example that comes to mind, I had no idea that in Kennebunkport, after they left the White House, Barbara Bush was driving a Pontiac Trans Am convertible around town.
I one time was with her in that car. She could not see. And we were at a stop sign on a hill right outside Kennebunkport. She gets out of the car, walks up to the road, looks both ways, comes back and gets in the car and says, "No one's coming." I just started praying.
It's a great conference builder when the driver has to get out of the car to see if traffic is coming.
Exactly.
Another funny thing is that the Bushes were big fans of shopping at Sam's Club,
Yes,
the
they
big
were.
discount warehouse. You tell in the book a great story about how Barbara Bush went to Sam's Club one time to buy copies of her own memoir, and what happened?
What happened was she'd used up all the copies the publisher had provided, and she liked to give them away. So she decided to go to Sam's Club, and there were none out on the shelf. So she asked the clerk for help, and the clerk gets on a microphone and says, "Barbara Bush is here looking for copies of her book. Do we have any in the back?" She died. That's not the way it was supposed to happen.
It's been nearly 4 years since George H.W. Bush died. When you think back to his life and your times with him, there must just be an unending flow of memories. But now, with a little distance, what do you think about when you think of him?
He was a lot of fun to work with. He was exhausting, but he just had so much energy. He was humble and had the biggest heart of anyone I think I ever knew.
You write about how this was not just a fulfilling job, but this was a job that changed your life and gave your life a whole new meaning and a whole lift that it otherwise would not have had. Do you miss it?
I grew up on a farm in Missouri. My dad never graduated from high school. And so to end up where I did is just sort of bizarre. But in the last month, I realized Mikhail Gorbachev once told me to shut up. It's a great story. It's in the book. And have I met Queen Elizabeth? Yes, I have. How lucky was I to work for this man? But I miss it. I miss them. But they knew that their time had come. They were both ready to go, which was interesting. So it was just sort of natural progression. It was time for me to go too. Not to heaven, but to leave this amazing. I couldn't do it for anybody else. I think that's what I'm trying to say. If one of the former presidents offered me a job right now, I would say no.
There's a lot in the book that's poignant. You write at the end in the acknowledgments that you asked Secretary of State James Baker to read the parts of your manuscript that dealt with him. And he said, "No, I'll read the whole thing," which he did. And then when you and he talked, what happened?
So Secretary Baker said to me, "You describe him better than anyone else ever has." And that meant everything to me. Everything to me.
There's another poignant scene in the book when President Barack Obama came to visit George H.W. Bush very soon before he died. What was that encounter like?
I just told this story and I did cry, so I'm going to try really hard not to do that. It was 2 days before he died. We knew the time was coming. President Bush I didn't feel should receive visitors that week. So I told President Bush that President Obama was supposed to come that afternoon. I said, "Sir, I'm thinking maybe today's not a good day." And he said, "No, I would like to see him." Of course I will see Barack. So we were having a great visit in the living room. President Bush is just listening, which is what he mainly did then. And all of a sudden, President Obama looked at me and he said, "Jean, I want the room." And I said, okay. So I cleared everybody out, and he just wanted a moment to say thank you and to say I love you. I'm not sure President Clinton ever forgave me that President Obama saw him last, and he didn't get to do the same thing. It was very moving.
You start the book with the story of the last time you talked with President Bush.
Yes.
And that's an emotional story. It's just you and he, hours before he died. You were alone with him, holding his hand, and what happened?
So holding his hand, it was about 5 o'clock in the evening. He would die about 10. This was just the two of us and his dog, Sully. And I'm just visiting with him. His eyes are closed. He wasn't in a coma, but he seemed somewhere else. And I had a tiny cough. I think I went, and his eyes flew open, and he said, "Jean, are you okay?" And I said, "Yes, sir, I am okay." And he said, "You'll be okay," and squeezed my hand. It's the last thing he said to me. It was perfect. I can't talk about it. It was.
Jean Becker writes that working for George and Barbara Bush and being part of their lives was like unwrapping a big Christmas present at least once a week, and she says she was never disappointed. Again, the name of her book is The Man I Knew.